Local resistance to global capital. I want to thank all of the participants who are going to be part of this webinar today, who have so kindly, knowing that all of them are so busy, willing to give their time to talk to us. And we will then continue with our program. Today, I just want to very briefly say that, which is already has been written in the blurb, Karunamoyee Sarder, a landless widow from a village in Bangladesh, in Khulna, was murdered today, 7 November, 30 years ago. This is a 30th anniversary. And this was a movement against the shrimp aquaculture industry. And her murder led all of us to get really involved, and it invigorated the industry. And when we were working, we found that it was not just a Bangladesh issue. We met across some of the people who are present here going to be talking today. So it is an international issue, and that is what we want to bring out in our discussions today. So without much ado, I just want to start with, I will introduce everybody later on, but we have 6 speakers with us, and I will give their names when we first show a video, which just puts in perspective what the whole movement started 30 years ago in Bangladesh, and then we'll bring in the Bangladesh perspective and then the global perspective. So over to you now, for Mayuk, who's our host actually, who will show us the video about Karunamoyee and the movement here.
জাতীয় পার্টির আমলে ঈশ্বর সরকার ক্ষমতা আসার পরে 83 থেকে 85 সাল 86 সালে জোরদারভাবে এলাকায় চিংড়ি চাষ শুরু করে দিল। চিংড়ি চাষ যখন শুরু হলো, বাণিজ্যিক চিংড়ি চাষ, তখন এলাকায় চিংড়ি চাষির যে গুন্ডা মুস্তান রায়েরা এলাকায় অত্যাচার করতে লাগলো, নারীদের উপর অত্যাচার করতে লাগলো। আর চিংড়ি চাষের কারণে এলাকায় ফসল হয় না, আমন ধান, এলাকার গরিব মানুষ যারা শ্রম বিক্রি করার জন্য বাইরে যেত, ফলে এলাকাটা শ্মশানে পরিণত হয়ে গেছিল। তখন আমরা এলাকায় ভূমিহীন সংগঠনের পক্ষ থেকে চিংড়ি চাষ বিরোধী একটা আন্দোলন গড়ে তুললাম।
1990 সাল আমাদের এই করুণাময়ীকে হত্যা করা হয় একটিমাত্র কারণে, যেটা ছিল আমাদের এই ওয়াজেদ আলী কর্তৃক এখানে এই পোল্ডারটাকে উনি আসছিলেন চিংড়ি চাষ করার জন্য। কিন্তু আমরা অত্র এলাকার বহিরাগত অন্য পোল্ডারের যে দৃশ্য, চিংড়ি চাষ করলে মানুষের কত ক্ষতি হয়, মানুষের জীবন বৈচিত্র্য যে কি পরিবেশ কি বিদূষিত হয়, সেটার কারণে যখন উনি আমাদের এখানে চিংড়ি চাষের জন্য পরিকল্পনা করলেন, আমরা এলাকার লোক সবাই সমবেত হই এবং সেখানে আমরা ব্যাপক আকারে প্রচার চালাই যে আমরা কোনো অবস্থাতেই আমাদের এই 22 পোল্ডারকে আমরা চিংড়ি চাষ করতে দেব না।
ঠিক কালী পুজোর আগের দিন 6 তারিখ ওই রাত্রে এখানে কালী পুজো হয়। সেই কালী পুজোয় ওনারা অতর্কিত অবস্থায় এসে হামলা করে।
রাত্রি সংবাদ গেল যে হরিণ খোলা এসে গের করতেছে, বাদ কাটিয়ে দিয়ে লবণ পানি তুলতেছে। রাত্রি সংবাদ গেলি আমরা সকালে সব লোকজন ডাকলাম, এই ডাকে গের যদি করে তাহলে তো আমরা বেঁচে থাকবো না, গের করলে আমরা তো মরে যাবো, গরিব মানুষ আমরা কী করে বাঁচবো? যাকে জমি আছে তারা তো দান চাইবা দেবে, আর আমরা কী করে বাঁচবো? আমরা তো কুটে কেটে খাই, মাছ শাক মেরে খাই। তা এই কলি তা কলকি হাত সব জাতি গেট করতে মোটে দেওয়া যাবে না। আমরা এই অবদাতে যাচ্ছি, যেই সামনে ওরা ডাল শোট কি নিয়ে দাঁড়াইছে, এই বোম আমরা চিনি না, আমরা কোনো দিন দেখিনি। এখন ওই দাঁড়ালি আমরা করছি কি আমরা যাচ্ছি অবদার দিতে, আমরা ওকে তো আর কিছু করছি নি। আমরা করছি যে আমরা গেট দেবো না, আমরা লিস্ট করবো না, আমরা বাদ কাটি লবণ বানিয়ে যুক্তি দেবো না, এই আমরা কতি আমরা চলে যাবো। তা আমায় কী কবে ওরা? এখন আমরা সেইভাবে যাচ্ছি, সামনে আগুই গেলি, একটু আগুই গেলি সামনে বোম মেরে দিলি, সে বোমটা ফাস্ট হলো না, মানে টিপ একটু বর্ষা বৃষ্টি পড়তেছে, টিপ করে ফাস্ট হলো না, না হলি ফিরে একটুখানি পরে আবার আরেকটা মেরে দিলি, সেই যে গেল ফাস্ট হয়ে গেলি, আমার এই সই লাগিয়ে এইখান থেকে কাঠি ডালি কেটে উঠে গেল।
এই কাছাকাছি আসে ওখানে ওরকে পিছনে দিলাম যে যদি ওরা কোনো হামলা করে তা আমাদের মহিলারা করবে না, করলে ওরা পুরুষদের করবে। এইটা আমরা মনেই করি কিছু মহিলারা আমার জেঠিমা করুণাকে আমার জেঠি, ওনার উনি গেলে আমার দলে ও কেন উনি করেছে কি কাছে কি এই পুরুষেদের ভাইরে দেয় ইস্যু দিতে হবে, দেও সব জাপ দিয়ে আমরা মহিলারা প্রতি মহিলারা আমরা ঝাঁপিয়ে গেলাম, ওকে পিছনে ফেললাম, এরির ভিতরে বোম ফেললো, কিরে প্রথমে ফেললো তাকে সে ওটা কি এমনি ভোম না কি তা কাউকটা কিন্তু এটা গড়ে গেল, গড়ে যাওয়ার পর কি একটা ফুটলো, ওঠার পরে যে শব্দ ডালো ধোঁয়া হয়ে গেল আর এত বড় একটা আওয়াজ হলো, মানে আমরা কেউ কারো কথা বুঝতে পারতে লাগলো না। ওই রূপবানের দিল বাড়ি, আর এদিক তার আগে কিন্তু গুলি চালাইছে, চালালি সব পাটনা পাট জান করেছে, যেটা বোম মারেছে সেখানে কিছু পড়ে গেছে, কিছু পড়েও আমরা সামনে কিছু রয়েছে, তাই আমরা ওই জাপ দিচ্ছি দিতে দিতে এর মধ্যে, কিন্তু শান্ত পিছনের আর কায়দা নেই, সামনে এগোতে।
সে তো আমার সামনে ছিল, সে মানুষ চিনতে পারে, চিনতে পারার পরে সে বুঝতেই পারে, সে কাছে কি ওই একবার আমরা ওদের সামনে চলে গেছি, চলে যাওয়ার পরে আমার পিছন দিয়ে সামনে দিয়ে গুলি গেলাতে ছড়তেছে, বোমের ধোঁয়া ছড়তেছে, দেখেন চোখ নষ্ট হয়ে গেছে, চোখে তো আমরা দেখতে পাইনি ওই বোমের ধোঁয়া লেগে। তারপরে আমরা সেই বোমের ধোঁয়া গুলি মেরে সামনে যেয়ে দেখি করুণাময় সর্দার ওই নাল ধরে বসে, কাছ থেকে অনিল তুই গ্রামের ছেলে হয়ে এই কাজ করিস নি, এই বলে মানে ওই বন্ধুকে মারলে এইভাবে ঝাড়া দিয়ে দিচ্ছে, মানে ও আটি ধরেছে, আর পিছন দিকতে ওই অনিলের পাশ পিছন দিকতে ওই পবিত্র বারবারের দেবেন ছেলে পবিত্র ওইটি আবার ওর কপালে বন্ধুকে নালা ঠকাই দিচ্ছে, ঠেকাই দিয়ে ওই দালাম দিয়ে মানে মেরে দিচ্ছে।
So when we usually had these movements across in many parts of Bangladesh, it may be land grabbing, it could be grabbing of water bodies, it could be violence against women of all kinds. We found that when we brought it up at the national level, we would get results. Not always immediately, but it would. But with the shrimp aquaculture, this was something that was totally impossible. And the shrimp aquaculture we saw was something that touched upon every issue that we are talking about today. Violence against women, human rights violations of the worst kind. It's ecological destruction at a level that completely destroys the soil, the land, the trees, the mangrove forests. It just salinates the land completely, so it becomes impossible to grow anything. There's people who are displaced. There's women are the ones who are the most affected, because they're the ones who have to turn and look and care, do the care work, bring in the fodder, bring in fuel, bring in water, and everything's gone, which used to be just around their homes before. And we found that the violence was severe. It was so severe, and rape was a very a constant threat all the time. And sexual violence was very prevalent by the goons of the shrimp owners. So which is why, seeing what was happening in other areas, that in the area where Karunamoyee was, and the different villages, the 14 villages in that Polder, they resisted it, and it's still free from shrimp cultivation. But as trying to work with it, we found that it was a story that is similar in different countries. And I'd like to thank Vandana, because she first invited me to a meeting in Chennai, where I met a lot of the Indian, Malaysian, and some other international activists too, who were being to be interested in this issue. And I'm sure Vandana may be speaking about it, the whole court case that was going on, because that was taken up at the Supreme Court level about shrimp aquaculture and banning it. Rizwana will speak a lot about it from the Bangladesh angle. So we found that this was something that touched a lot of us, and then we found we went and had a meeting in Delhi where there was a public hearing, and then we went and met across the globe, people from Ecuador, Honduras, from the Philippines, from Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand, and all over. And we realized what the industry was all about, and that it was a global industry. So we are still talking about this issue now, 30 years later. The industry is still there, and we keep fighting. The local resistance is still very much there. Happily, in Bangladesh, in many areas, people have already reclaimed shrimp lands to go back to agriculture. It's taken them 10 years to go back to producing the same kind of agriculture, basically because in Bangladesh, they use the extensive method rather than the intensive method, which meant that there was lesser use of all the heavy chemicals and pesticides and everything, but there was use of pesticides, chemicals, which left remnants. So all that will be discussed. And so, as I said, the movement against the shrimp aquaculture is not only growing as a movement against, but people reclaiming land back and going back to agriculture. Today, we are also launching from Bangladesh the 1 Billion Rising 2021, which is 1 Billion Rising Gardens, which talks about not only standing up and fighting violence against women and all kinds of violence. It's just not the bodily violence, the mental violence, but also the violence of all the work that women do and being snatched away from them, but violence against the earth too. And with the pandemic that is going on, this is what is happening. We thought that in the 30 years since Karunamoyee was killed and we started a movement in such a big way, it was that we couldn't have a large gathering like we usually do. So we thought of having a webinar where we bring all our friends together. We couldn't bring everybody who's been with us. I hope there was a time that we could be able to do it. We can do it, but we've asked everyone to write and we want to bring out a publication. But I hope they're all watching. If not now, they'll be watching like in the Americas. It's an impossible time now, but they will watch it on our Facebook pages. So with those words, I just want to say that I want to thank you, and I want to, it gives me great pleasure to briefly present to you our speakers. I will give you their names in the order that they will be speaking on. First, we will have the Bangladeshi context, and then we'll have the international context. So from the Bangladesh context, the first speaker will be Rizwana Hassan. Rizwana Hassan, as many of you may know her or may not know her, she's an environmental lawyer, has been with us for a long time, and has been very much in the forefront of all kind of environmental law and environmental cases, and bringing up the issues. With us on the shrimp industry, she has been in a number of cases with us, including trying to curb the shrimp industry totally from this, but she'll talk about the process more. Rizwana has won a couple of prizes, the Goldman Prize, and more recently, that is for her institution, but she herself has also been given the Magsaysay Award. So that was Rizwana. Next, after Rizwana, we'll have Shapon Adnan. Professor Shapon Adnan is a very well-known academic and researcher, and has been with us for many years because he's one of the few academics remaining in Bangladesh who have not sold his soul to the corporate sector and does not do consultancies. He's very much into research. He's a political analyst, especially on the political economy. And so he'll be speaking more about his work, and he's done his PhD from the University of Cambridge. And he's now visiting fellow at SOAS in London, but does a lot of research and work. He's been with the NUS in Singapore. So that's Shapon. And then we have, after Shapon, Kasha Paproke, who's a much younger academic who's joined the LSE now as a faculty. She did her research in the area itself, a PhD in Khulna, and has spent many years in the region where she has done a lot of work on the impacts of the shrimp aquaculture on women, on the on the people themselves and the area and what it means. So after Kasha Paproki, we will move on and we will have Gudrun speak about her movement and her action in as part of the northern campaigners and the northern, who've been warriors with us in this fight. And she's been very strong, very active, and very passionate. Speak about her experiences of trying to bring the issues to the public in Sweden and in Europe. So Gudrun's been working with the Swedish Nature Conservation Society, SSNC, for many years, and now she's on their board. And Gudrun is someone we just totally, depend on whenever we want things to move and for us to get the passion. After Gudrun, we'll have Amit Thavraj. Amit has been excellent in terms of analyzing all the data we've got on many issues, but especially on the issues of certification. I think as we discuss it, it'll come out very clear how the industry is using certification to hoodwink the consumers in thinking that this is a very easy way of you be having, within quotes, safe shrimps. So Amit has really analyzed very deeply and thoroughly what this certification really means and what a fallacy it is. And after Amit, we would have Vandana Shiva, who's absolutely very well known. And I don't think I need to introduce her. Vandana is a phenomenon in many ways. I mean, as I was yesterday, I wrote to somebody and just saying that I remember I've met Vandana a long time back, but I remember how in '92 at the Earth Summit, Vandana was the star. I mean, everywhere where Vandana spoke, there was crowds, and Vandana speaking meant a lot. So Vandana has been somebody for all of us who's been a kind of a focus and a person whose voice, whose writing, whose thoughts, whose commitment matters so much. She is somebody who speaks passionately, speaks beautifully, and on issues concerning the health, the well-being of Earth and women. So with those words, I think I'd like to start with requesting Rizwana to be the first speaker. Thank you. Rizwana, over to you.
Thank you very much. Well, let me start by paying respect to Karunamoyee Sarder. We are all here to remember her sacrifices for her food sovereignty. And that actually has led way to a broader movement subsequently. And shrimp cultivation, the way it sounded, it's not taken to be very rosy by everyone today in Bangladesh, thanks to the sacrifice that Karunamoyee made and the subsequent movements that her comrades continued with. So I will just like to share some facts about Bangladesh. Shrimp cultivation started here in Bangladesh back in the 80s. And it actually was a prescription from the Asian Development Bank. It started in the Chokoria Sundarbans forest area. It's a natural forest area, but the natural forest area was cleared to pave way for cultivation of shrimp. So we had a total of 21,000 acres of natural forest land in Chokoria Sundarbans. Because of shrimp cultivation, we have lost 100% of it. Then it gets started in the other coastal areas where we had polders, and the very idea of having polders was to ensure that the agricultural lands are protected from saline water intrusion, but defying the very purpose of the polders. Shrimp cultivation expanded in other coastal areas, and the polders that were initially meant to protect the agricultural land from saline water intrusion were actually breached, tampered with, and saline water was brought inside the Polder area to go for shrimp cultivation. In most of the areas, it was not the locals who were involved in the cultivation process. The locals were the landowners. They would lease out their lands on a yearly basis to the shrimp cultivators, who were mostly the external players. So after the ADB prescription, all the fisheries policies that we had, they all endorsed shrimp cultivation as something very beneficial to the economy of the country. Then subsequently, we had a national shrimp policy that was passed in 2014. And I must tell you that this particular policy was passed after a judgment was pronounced that basically wanted the government to take a restrictive approach about the entire industry. So the national shrimp policy claims that we need shrimp cultivation for socio-economic development. We need shrimp cultivation for employment purposes. And the government's policy cites that about 1.5 crore people are employed in the shrimp cultivation sector, whereas USAID in its study, which is of the same time, says that about 1.2 million people are actually employed in the sector. So you can see that an inflated figure is being used by the government to justify as to why shrimp cultivation must stay. So this whole issue of employment, socio-economic development has another side of it. In areas where we are having newly developed lands, there are powerful players who want to grab the land, and they are trying to grab the land in the name of shrimp cultivation. So they want the government to settle the land in their name because they will be employing generation, they will be earning foreign currency. So, and they want to do shrimp cultivation because that is something that the government favors. So this has become a weapon of land grabbing, particularly in areas where we are having chores, which are newly emerging riverine islands. The government also says that shrimp cultivation is needed because we need poverty to go away. So it should be done in coastal areas where we have a very high rate of poverty. But if you compare the statistics given by the government itself, Shamnagar and Dakop areas where 100% land used to be under shrimp cultivation have been named by the government itself as the worst poverty-ridden areas. The poverty is so high there that it's even higher than an area called Dimla in Bangladesh, where you have occasional famine. So although the government is saying that shrimp cultivation is contributing to poverty eradication, the two worst poverty-ridden areas of Bangladesh remain Shamnagar and Dakop, with highest cultivation of shrimp. The government, of course, is very happy that shrimp is bringing in so much of foreign currency. The reality remains that even today, 17% of the total cultivable land of the country is under saline water shrimp cultivation. This has an impact on food security. The traditional agriculture is suffering. Rice cultivation has suffered a lot. People of the areas would say that they don't have the traditional palm trees, coconut trees, banana trees, betel nut, mangoes, jackfruit, wood apples anymore. Natural resource base have been depleted. Forest in Cox's Bazar has totally gone, and there are other pockets in Cox's Bazar where we have forest, and those areas are also being leased out by the government for shrimp cultivation. Due to court intervention, official lease out has stopped, but unofficially the land is still under the clutch of the shrimp cultivators. Water courses, salinity has become a major issue. People of those areas will always be complaining about persistent skin diseases, stomach problems, high blood pressure, which has become an issue for pregnant women. And it also always means extra work for women. If your water course is saline infested, then women will have to really leave that area, walk to far distant areas to get water for daily household needs. People complain of losing livestock, and that has an impact on their food security. If you go to the shrimp areas, the grandmother would come to you and tell you that I can't give my grandchild milk because I can't rear cows anymore. I can't give my grandchildren eggs because we don't have chicken in these villages anymore. They have lost the sweetwater fishery, the open sweetwater fishery, which still provides 60% of the only animal protein intake for the poor people. If you now talk about employment, something that the government really wants to flag in justifying the shrimp cultivation, if you go to the shrimp cultivated areas, young men would come to you and complain about not having work because the traditional agriculture is gone. So in traditional agriculture, a field that would require 10 people to give labor, in a shrimp farm, you just need one person to guard the farm. So young men are complaining that they're losing jobs. There have been incidents of deteriorating law and order situation. It's not only Karunamoyee Sarder whom we have lost. We have also lost Govinda Datta, Zaved Sheikh, Maula Box, Zaheda Begum, Kinu Ghazi, and perhaps our very well-known journalist Manik Shaha. There have been incidents of rapes and other forms of sexual violence against women. So like in India, we filed a case in the Supreme Court of Bangladesh asking for regulation of this industry. As in the case of Jagannathan, who was a farmer who brought the case in the Indian Supreme Court. In the case of Bangladesh, the Supreme Court said that the government must take a restrictive approach. The court here did not direct for a thorough cost-benefit analysis as was done by the Indian Supreme Court. And the Indian Supreme Court found that the industry was doing more damage than any benefit. In the case of Bangladesh, the Bangladesh court actually relied on the Indian study. This was a petition that was filed jointly by Nijera, Kori and Bela. We got the judgment in 2013, and to frustrate this very judgment, the government has come up with the national shrimp policy. Our court hasn't talked about polluter pays principle or hasn't directed for payment of compensation to the farmers or the villagers, but the government has directed the government to be restrictive in approach to ensure that minimum land is used, that use of land for shrimp cultivation is limited. No agricultural land, forest is being used for cultivation of saline water shrimp. And the government court has also directed the government to ensure supply of potable water so that public health is protected. It has directed the government to ensure that landowners are not forced to go for shrimp cultivation, and shrimp cultivators must not be allowed to damage ecology. And if they continue to do their shrimp farming without environmental impact assessment and environmental impact certificate, environmental clearance certificate, then measures will have to be taken against them. I'm not aware that a single shrimp farm has thus far applied for environmental clearance, and there has been no environmental impact assessment or social impact assessment, although 17% of the total cultivable land is under salinity intrusion. National Shrimp Policy has asked for environment-friendly shrimp cultivation.
You'll have to.
Okay. It said that all land that is suitable for shrimp cultivation will have to be brought under shrimp cultivation. And then it has also allowed authorized use of sluice gates and the polders. It has talked about education about shrimp cultivation, starting from primary level to secondary up to masters. If needed, then there can be PhD degrees also on shrimp cultivation. So the National Shrimp Policy obviously is trying to frustrate the judicial order, but as Kushiapa said, that local movements in many areas have been successful. People have reclaimed their land, but I feel that there is a long way still to go to ensure that the entire coastal area is freed from commercial shrimp cultivation. And the other two things that I must mention is the financial incentive that is being given by the banks to the shrimp cultivators, and the provision of the Water Act 2013 that has actually kept provision for declaring areas as aquaculture zone without any requirement as for public participation. But before I end, now that Vandana ji is here, I just wanted to flag one thing, that this is not the only attack on our food sovereignty or local agriculture. The government of Bangladesh is seriously favoring genetically modified seeds, and we have already allowed commercial plantation of eggplants, brinjals, and the government is thinking of going for this vitamin enriched rice and potato very soon. So I think it's very important that we keep up our fight for local agriculture, traditional agriculture, and we keep on building movements together. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rizwana. Sorry I had to rush you, but we want to hear everyone, and then we want to have space for discussion. So can I ask Dr. Shapon Adnan to come in now? And Shapon has done extensive research in both the Noakhali and Khulna areas, as well as other places, on the political economy of the shrimp aquaculture, shrimp industry. Shapon, please.
Just 1 second, I'm trying to find my
your presentation.
Yeah, I'm just trying to find the presentation.
Okay. So in the meantime, I'll just say that Shapon, as I said, is a professorial research associate in the Department of Development Studies. Shapon, as soon as you find it, I'm just talking. Once you find it.
I'm sharing it. Moyo, can you use the copy of the presentation that I sent you?
Yeah, I'm sharing it. Tell me when to change the screen.
Yeah, if you can come to the first slide.
Yeah, Mayuk. Yeah.
Okay, very well. Let me begin. I'm going to try and cover more or less the landscape, the context that Khushi and Rizwana have already covered, but hopefully with a slightly different angle. So let's move on to the next slide. Here you see the tiger prawn, which is the sort of major shrimp crop grown in British water shrimp farming in Bangladesh. Next slide, please. Okay, the areas in Bangladesh where shrimp farming takes place are the southwestern districts, which are Khulna, Bagherhat, Satkira, southeastern districts, Noakhali, Chittagong, and as has already been mentioned, there are these polders which were initially constructed for freshwater farming, but because shrimps need brackish water, these have been systematically breached or bored. Next slide, please. Here you see a map of Bangladesh at the top left, and then if you look at the bottom left, you see the shrimp-going belt from the southeast to the southwest to the southeast, and the picture on the right shows you a view of the polder. There are many polders in Khulna where shrimp-going takes place. Next, please. So in order to understand what's going on here, we need to look at this landscape in terms of village settlements, farming areas which are surrounded by ring embankments, that is circular embankments, or at least closed embankments. And then there are saline rivers with tidal activity. Next, please. These diagrams show you a bit about the kind of topography of the polders. If you look at the middle picture, you can see on the left-hand side the embankments here. So the saline waters outside with tidal activity, you have the embankments, and then you have the protected area inside. Now, the bottom picture shows you a kind of satellite view of settlements, rivers, and embankments. Next, please. This is just a view of the landscape. You can see these creeks inside the polder at low tide in this case. And the tidal activity in this area is such that it changes enormously by high tide. Next. This is typical picture inside the polder. You have paddy fields surrounded by shrimp fields or shrimp gates. Gate is the word used in Bangla to mean shrimp fields. Next, please. And these are kind of typical of settlements of the poor who live here in these areas. Next, please. Now, moving on to the issues of dispossession, which have been discussed, noted before. Shrimp farming leads to grabbing of land in various ways. So look, if very briefly, the mechanisms of dispossession can be classified as follows. There are the violent means which involve extra-legal force by private armies, mostans, and so on. But there is also state violence by the security forces, and also quiet state violence in the form of changes in law and regulations which undermine the land rights of the people, local people, and make it easier for shrimp growers from outside to grab those lands. And then there are the non-violent mechanism where force is not directly used. So you have market transactions, for example, mortgage contracts, where peasants who fail to repay their debts and have accumulated debts, but have mortgaged their lands, are in a position where they have to hand over their land to the moneylender, and that can go into shrimp farming. And in addition to all of these, you also have traditional clientelist relationships between the local rich and powerful who own the land. And in the coastal areas from Noakhali, for example, you have sharecroppers in Borishal, in Khulna, and there are these clientelist relationships by which sharecroppers have access to land. And as landlord patrons themselves move into shrimp farming or find richer tenants, the sharecroppers are delinked. And so in that sense, they lose access to land which they possess. Next slide, please. Now, all of these processes of land grabs do not go without struggles by the by the people who are affected. Now, in this huge landscape of hundreds of miles remote areas from the cities and from the centers of power, atomistic resistance in each village is a hopeless task. So there is the necessity of organized resistance against combined local and global shrimp business interests. And that means not only the local shrimp growers, but also the depots where the shrimps are processed, the factories where these are packaged for export, and so on. So you have this huge supply chain, which is backing the local level shrimp growing. And resistance means not just resistance in the village, but to this entire chain of forces. Now, Nigeria has a very laudable record of organizing and mobilizing landless associations, particularly through the landless, the associations of the landless, in Bangla known as Bhumihin Shomitis. And this was one of these shomitis, or the entire shomiti in the Polder 22 area were involved in resisting the forces of shrimp growers trying to take over that polder. That is the reason Karunamoyee was murdered, which you saw in that short clip from Nigeria. Next, please. So these are slides of women's of the landless associations. These are from Noakhali. Next, please. Next, please. And these are landless groups who've been mobilized and who are trying to say speak out against the way that their lands have been grabbed. Next, please. These are also, this is a group meeting of the Bhumihin Shumiti, Nijera Kori Bhumihin Shumiti in Noakhali, who were discussing these issues. Next, please. Now, this struggle for land grabs has taken many forms. Uh, in the Noakhali Chords, for example, where a Chingri Mahal or a shrimp zone was declared by the government, there have been cases of physical assault, arson or setting fire and murders of landless or near landless households which were occupying land so that their land, they could be evicted and their lands could be taken over. Resistance to these has taken overt and covert forms. Overt forms are visible, open forms like resistance through processions, demonstrations, handing over a memorandum, and so on. Covert resistance takes the form of, quiet, no open confrontation, but attempts to mobilize quietly and undertake sabotage, if possible, quietly. What we see in the shrimp growing belts is transformation of covert to overt resistance, which means that people, instead of sort of hiding away individually, remaining anonymous, decide to come out in the open and fight the forces which are oppressing them, taking over the lands for shrimp farming. And one of the things that we see very interestingly in both Khulna and Noakhali is the transformation of this resistance under extraordinary circumstances. The outcomes have been uneven. In some cases, like Polder 22, it was possible to stop the shrimp growing forces, but that has not been the case everywhere. And so the outcomes vary and they depend on the balance of political forces, which involve factions, classes, institutions like the state and its agencies, its security forces. Next, please. Now, impacts of the economy, this I will not have time to discuss at all. I will just go through the bullet points. Obviously, if land is taken away, there's a change in the distribution. But in addition, we have changes in land use patterns as paddy fields are converted into shrimp crates, and these then lead to the growth of capitalist relations. Shrimp farming by commercial growers is the primary pattern, but we also see in the Khulna area individual households and groups, including the landless workers associations themselves, doing the undertaking shrimp farming, but in a way that doesn't affect the ecology of the interior of the polder on the outside, the outer side of the embankments. And also there is a change in power relations in the local area as outside farmers bring in mastans and their private armies. And they also not only have private armies, but they also manage to manipulate the local police and security forces who often typically operate in favor of the shrimp growers rather than the people whom they oppress. Next, please. Now, these are just some shots of shrimp crates in Khulna. Next. This is from Noakhali. Next. This is a shrimp growing farm in Noakhali. Next. So the impacts on the environment, on livelihoods and outmigration, again, very quickly in bullet point form, there is destruction of mangroves, destruction of freshwater habitats, obviously loss of biodiversity as trees and freshwater species die out, a destruction caused by catching of shrimp fries in coastal rivers and creeks. This is something that poor women whose lands have been taken away and whose kitchen gardens have been destroyed undertake as the only way of surviving under these very difficult conditions. But catching of shrimp fries is a very crude method, and for every shrimp fry that is caught, many other fries of other species are also caught and destroyed. All of this has an impact on livelihoods as people in these areas lose their traditional paddy and freshwater food systems. They have to look for other occupations like the ones that I've suggested. People go to the depots, women go to the depots to head shrimps. They go and work in the factories. The men go and drive rickshaws in the town and so on. The whole process leads to food insecurity on the one hand and out-migration from these areas. Next. So we have not only direct violence, but also the operation of structural violence. Structural violence, very simply defined as violence that is not visible or direct, but which leads to, which involves constraints, which lead to outcomes which would have been very similar to that of direct violence. And these are illustrated by the non-violent mechanisms of land grabbing, the dispossession and destitution of people living under those conditions with constrained livelihoods, food insecurity, the displacement, and their constant out-migration. Next, please. And this is, I think, the last slide I have. This is what has happened in the shrimp growing coastal areas. There has been, over the decades, a structural transformation. Land grabs we can think of as primitive accumulation, the kind of accumulation which is not capitalist accumulation, but which creates the conditions for capitalist accumulation. In the case of the shrimp growing belt, because of the impact of the neoliberal policies of the time that we're talking about, the kind of primitive accumulation that we see can be more precisely regarded as accumulation by dispossession, as defined by Harvey. We see, following the primitive accumulation processes, capitalist relations in shrimp farming, in processing, in factory packaging for export markets. Note that the commercialization goes beyond shrimp farming in these areas. We take the example of the Khulna. Polder 22, for example, could grow freshwater crops, but the surrounding polders had brackish water shrimp fields all over them. So people from these outside polders would come to Polder 22, to the markets and the haats and bazaars there, to buy freshwater products which was not available in their area, in their respective polders. So you have forced commoditization of the entire economy, and involves basic food stuff which people need for their food security. And the whole sequence of land grabs, primitive accumulation, capitalist relations, forced commercialization, landlessness, food insecurity, out-migration from rural areas to the cities, all of that can be seen as a chain reaction of the impacts of neoliberal globalization and the balance of class forces. Thank you.
Thank you, Shapon. That was very extensive and very useful. We next have Kasha Paproki, and she has spent a number of years in the area itself working for her PhD thesis and also for postdoctoral. So I would like her to talk about it, especially in bringing in the climate change adaptation policies that are being used to promote this devastating production process as a solution when it's actually the opposite. Kasha.
Great. Well, I'm going to share my screen. And while I'm doing that, can you see my slides? Yeah. I'll just thank Kushiapa and Moyuk and the organizers for having me. It really is an honor to be speaking on this panel along with these other panelists. And I'll say that I'm happy to be speaking after Shapon and Rizwana Appa, because my own research in the region really resonates with a lot of what they've said about the social and ecological impacts of shrimp aquaculture in coastal Bangladesh. So instead of sort of repeating what they've talked about, what I want to talk about today is the relationship, as Kushi said, between industrial aquaculture and climate change adaptation, which is increasingly playing a role in coastal development planning in Bangladesh and elsewhere. And over the past 10 years or so, development agencies and climate change adaptation planners have begun talking about industrial shrimp aquaculture as a climate change adaptation strategy. So that means we see narratives like this, which you can see was on the New York Times website, from major media outlets, about coastal Bangladesh being doomed. This is a word that's often used due to climate change, with the expansion of commercial shrimp aquaculture as the only option for production in a sinking coastline. And these kinds of narratives suggest that continuing to farm in this region, farm agriculture, is impossible because of climate change. This is a widespread discourse among many media outlets, both within and outside of Bangladesh. And that's both supporting and supported by these claims of development agencies who are making plans for the future of the region. So if you're aware of Naomi Klein's discussion of disaster capitalism, this is a logic that might be familiar to you. So what I'm excited to share on Today of All Days is that the movement that Karunamoyee led, of course, continues today and has been actively proving these claims to be false, showing that both agriculture and alternative agrarian futures are possible, even in the context of climate change, and perhaps they are especially possible in the context of climate change. So I'll do this by telling you about 3 different communities in coastal Bangladesh that have had very different experiences with shrimp aquaculture, to examine the different kinds of possibilities for production in the region and the futures that are made possible through the movement Karunamoyee led. The first community is in Polder 23, which has almost entirely transitioned from rice agriculture to shrimp aquaculture, as we've heard, starting in the 1980s. Polder 22, which, as you've already heard, was a Karunamoyee's home, has historically resisted this transition to shrimp, and therefore farmers there continue to grow rice and other agricultural crops. And then finally, farmers in Polder 29 have transitioned from shrimp back to the earlier mode of agricultural production through and inspired by this same social mobilization we see in Polder 22. Okay, so in this image, you can see Polder 23, and I won't go into much detail here because you've already heard a lot about it from Professor Adnan, about the extraordinarily serious impacts shrimp has had here, both socially and ecologically. But as you can see, most of the trees in this village have died and little else grows here but shrimp. People are almost entirely unable to grow fruit and vegetables in home gardens due to the soil becoming completely salinated from the shrimp gears. They can no longer graze livestock, collect firewood or drinking water in their local community, so they now need to pay to secure all of these from nearby towns. So what we see is almost complete dispossession from common pool resources that formerly sustained people's livelihoods. And the result, as we've heard, is a mass exodus of landless people and smallholder farmers whose livelihoods have disappeared and who are no longer able to support their families in this community. They migrate to nearby cities, in particular Khulna, nearby Khulna city, and also to Kolkata, where they find work primarily in construction and in factories where they work deheading shrimp for its frozen for export. So these are not the kind of livelihoods that people from this community say that they aspire to. And I'll just say that for a lot of researchers and development agencies, the movement of these people out of this region is referred to as climate change adaptation. And my research indicates that, or climate migration. And my research indicates that that this really is migration due to the economic impacts of shrimp and not to the impacts of climate change. Nevertheless, many development agencies continue to promote the expansion of industrial shrimp aquaculture in these communities as an adaptation strategy. And in this vision, the image that you see in front of you here is what the future of adaptation looks like. So now, literally just across the river in Polder 22, we see a dramatically different picture, both socially and ecologically, indicating a different vision of agrarian futures. And thanks to the landless movement there, they continue to farm rice and other crops, as well as to grow subsistence gardens, graze livestock, and to access other common pool resources that have been degraded elsewhere in the shrimp producing area. They do this through a combination of activist and economic strategies, including pressing for their rights to access common lands and building their economic capacity through cooperative farming enterprises. and also developing seed banks for the preservation of indigenous seed varieties, which support ongoing subsistence production. And as a side note here, I'll say that many indigenous rice varieties across Bengal have traits that naturally facilitate adaptation to climate risks, such as flooding and salinity, which landless activists cite as a key reason for restoring them in their farming practices in this region. So movement leaders continue to attribute the preservation of their ecology and social life to the success of Karunamoyee's movement. Indeed, throughout coastal Bangladesh, I've heard activists refer to this movement against shrimp as Karunamoyee Andolon, or Karunamoyee's movement. And today, this movement is gaining traction in surrounding communities which had made the transition to shrimp already, motivated largely by the social and ecological impacts we observed earlier in Polder 23. I took this picture that you see here in Polder 29 in 2012, where landless movement members have now successfully organized to return to rice cultivation. And this picture is from approximately the same spot in 2014. This return is noteworthy not only because of the inequality characterizing the local political economy of land, but also because areas like this are widely thought of and said to be unviable for continued rice cultivation in the time of climate change. However, after about 7 years of flushing salinity through the monsoon rains and not cultivating shrimp, the land has returned to its former fertility, and farmers are now successfully cultivating rice and vegetables. Perhaps more importantly, all of the community members, landless laborers and sharecroppers who had been forced to migrate out of the village for work have now returned to participate again in agricultural production. Now, women in Polder 29 note in particular that the work of social reproduction, feeding and providing for their families, which had been critically threatened during the shrimp period, and this is work for which women are primarily responsible, this work is now made much easier through the restoration of their ecology and social life. So the story of Polder 29, I suggest, is important not only to the politics of rice versus shrimp, but it highlights two very important dimensions of understanding climate change. The first is that it's essential to understand the impacts of climate change firmly alongside other dynamics shaping local ecologies. And second, that we need to be very careful about making claims about the kinds of futures which are viable and which are not. Climate justice must entail the self-determination of local communities in imagining both what is possible and what is desirable. So then I thought I would just end with images from previous Karunamoyee Day celebrations. It's a shame that we can't be celebrating today in Harinkola, but certainly today we can honor the movement there by remembering their struggle and the work they've done, not only to protect their own community, but also to share it with others throughout the region and beyond. Thank you.
Thank you, Kasha. That was brilliant and you kept to the time. We will now we will move from Bangladesh into the global scenario, and I'll ask Amit Thavaraj to first speak. And Amit will be looking more at how the industry is trying to give itself a green image, within quotes, and through the falsehood of certification, hoodwinking consumers. So he has looked at some of the certification research done and the process that has been used in Honduras and Vietnam and analyzed it. That will give us an idea. Also, we've done a couple in Cox's Bazar site, which again had very similar results. So Amit, over to you now. Amit, are you there?
Yeah, thank you. I thought Gudrun was to precede me, but I don't think
to exchange, we'll have a Gudrun first and you later. Does that make more sense?
That's fine, Gudrun, because I can take. So
okay, Gudrun. So what did you say? Did you want to go first, or do you want Gudrun?
I could, if she's not there, I could go first.
I'm sure she's there. Gudrun, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah,
can you see me?
First? Yeah, I can see you very well. Thank you. Hi,
okay,
Gudrun.
fine.
So do you want to go first?
Yes, I'm holding my mobile phone, so the picture might not be very good.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I feel very honored. The Swedish Society for Nature Conservation, I just want to say that it is a large, very well-known organization in Sweden, 100 years old. We are in every municipality in Sweden. We have a branch office or a branch organization, thousands of volunteers. I'm saying this just to understand that this is not happening all over Europe, what happened in Sweden. We also have our own, actually our own label, the label on about thousands of products like detergents and so forth. And we also were co-founder of the Swedish Organic organization. So we believe in certified products as a way for consumers to make the best choice and to also to strengthen the detergents to be more environmentally friendly. So we had some success in that, but there are things that cannot be certified. 1990, when Karunamoyee was killed, while she led a peaceful procession to resist the shrimp industry. We saw in Sweden the first tropical shrimp entering, a cheap, wonderful delicacy. I started to work at the Swedish Society for Nature Conservation, 1990. We had no idea what these shrimps were. We had not heard about it. Thanks to Mina Rahman at the Consumers Association of Penang, we were alerted of the detrimental effects to people and environment of the industrial shrimp production for the export market. So we started to alert the Swedish public that this was a product that should not be consumed, that could not be certified. And there was a lot done, the pressure from the retailers and from the industry to set up standards for organic shrimp as a response to our campaign. So the Swedish Organic Organization, KRAV, looked into the matter and asked the university to study, is it at all possible to have organic shrimp? And the result of that research was, if at all, it would only be 1 or 2% of the export market. And in that case, it would just legitimize the consumption. A success, because they decided there would be no certification of tropical shrimp. So we went ahead and campaigned. And I think you can see a picture. I sent a picture just to more easily follow me. Can you see? I gave it to, I sent it. So, so this, because it's all the supermarkets, we have mainly 3 big supermarket chains in Sweden, and all of them were selling tropical shrimp. But after, when the eco-labeling organization said no, certified, and our campaign after that made the supermarket chains not to sell any more tropical shrimp. But then came a German eco-label, and it was introduced again into Sweden, and all supermarket chains started to sell again. So then we decided we will have a really big campaign, which will focus on the shrimp for 2 years. We of course have many other issues that we focus on in other years, but now we just said this shrimp issue would be the focus. And we were very fortunate to be in contact with Nijira Kori and Kushi Kabir, and to have helped us to produce, help us with material. That was a film and that documentation showing what was happening in Bangladesh. This was very effective, and this campaign, so all the supermarket chains stopped selling again. And people became quite aware in Sweden about the issue. So what happened after that? The ASC certified shrimp was introduced. And the problem with that was that it was included in the WWF fish guide. The fish guide is used quite a lot in Sweden by consumers to know which fish or which seafood should I buy to make the best environmental choice. It has until then been a red light for tropical shrimp. No tropical shrimp should be eaten or consumed. But now it got a green light for ASC certified shrimp. That was something else. It was responsibly farmed. It didn't really say it was organic, but it was responsible. And it said less chemical and less antibiotics, even though they could not answer how much antibiotics or chemicals and compared to what. This became really a problem. We are there right now because WWF has a good reputation in Sweden and they do a lot of good work. So the campaigning becomes more difficult. And WWF has also joined hands with Oxfam, which is also very well-known European NGO. So the tropical shrimp is there again. I haven't said anything about restaurants. That's much more difficult to campaign for restaurants. There are thousands and thousands of restaurants, and it's quite difficult. But for the supermarkets, we did achieve. We are not giving up. I'll just tell you, we are not giving up. And actually, I sent a photo of me that you kind of cut off my head. And this we use when we, can you see me? We go around in the streets and with this hat, with this shrimp customs, there we have a small postcard, very simple, saying on the one side, oh, I'm sorry. Would you be willing to do one tiny thing for the environment? And if you look at the other side, there is a small explanation what it is all about, shrimp farming, the violation of human rights, the environmental destruction. And then thank you for doing one tiny thing for the environment. There's also, if there's 1 minute left, we had also a very short movie, 1.5 minutes. So it is possible to, with cooperation between our NGOs, Nigeria Kori, and ourselves or other NGOs in the South, working with these issues, if we can work together, we can be strong. And I'm sure we will succeed, but it is quite a tough work. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gudrun. Shall we go to Amit then? Because I think actually it makes sense that after Gudrun, if Amit then talks about it. Right, Amit.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. I'll just can you see the slide?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Right. So essentially, I was asked to take on from where Gudrun's left off, because in the consumer markets in the West, they rely heavily on certification. And what does it mean in terms of consumers, and what does it mean in terms of producers in producer countries like Bangladesh and Vietnam? These are very different things. So essentially, when one talks about certification, you see what is on the left, on the right hand is what consumers see. They see a claim made by a certifier, and they see shrimp with labels on them. And some of them might actually go to a website to find out what those labels mean, and they see something like this. Certifying environmentally responsible, socially responsible seafood. This is the ASC's claim. But what does it actually mean? And I've been trying to find out what it means for close to 15 years now. And when I started out I still am a volunteer, but I was an assistant to people like you, and I still am. So when people talk about shrimp standards, certification and all that, they're essentially talking about the standard document, which is a group of definitions and criteria and indicators which shows what that certified, environmentally certified, responsible or ethical or organic shrimp actually means. But there's a lot more to it. Apart from the standard document, you have an audit manual, and some auditor would have to go to the shrimp farm and find out if that farm is actually compliant with all the requirements in the standard. So it's and then that auditor would send a report which would go to the certifier, and the certifier would take some money from the shrimp farm and allow the shrimp farm to use that label, which is what the consumers see. Now, for the last 20 odd years, the academicians and researchers have spent most of their time arguing about the standard part of the document, that is the document itself. If you look at a selection of research that goes back all the way to 2007, and this is, I've stopped at 2007 because that's when the ASC started. They still haven't made up their mind about whether shrimp farm certification actually works or not. If you look at the first paper there, the principal researcher started out in around 2010, and they've still not made up their mind. You have statistical tools which result in stuff like this, which is very useful, but no consumer would be able to make head or tail out of this. And you have synthetic benchmarks, GSSI, CAPI. The second one is dead already. But these are very theoretical and very synthetic ways of looking at certification. And in fact, I get letters from eager PhD students pretty much every year, and they want to know how is the network responding to certification. And this particular standard has a fantastic benchmark score. And I keep telling them that it doesn't really matter, because we can have that argument, we can have that discussion, but it doesn't matter to the people in producer nations. And the most common example I give them is if you look at somebody like Karunamoyee Sarder, who was killed. And if you try to console her relatives by saying, but oh no, the ASC has a fantastic benchmark, it really wouldn't make any sense. So you will also notice in all these research papers, there's a very loud throat-clearing paragraph, which tells readers that this is synthetic, and the quality and integrity of audit reports and stuff like that is equally important to evaluate whether a standard is any good on the ground. And that's what I've been doing for about 12 to 15 years now, and I'll take the rest of my time to demonstrate that when the ASC says that their shrimp is socially responsible or environmentally responsible, I'll show you pictures and stuff from the farms which demonstrates that it isn't true. And let's see what we have here. So one of the criteria in the ASC standard, it's one of the pillars of their claims of environmental responsibility, is that they will not allow or certify farms in natural wetlands if they were built after 1999, the 1999 date being the cutoff point for the Ramsar Declaration. Now, it's very important to keep these 2 points in mind. They define natural wetlands in exactly the same way that Ramsar does. And this is their definition, not mine. And it very clearly says, the second arrow on the right, it says that if it's built after 1999, the farm cannot be certified. And there are no two ways about it. So this is in the standard. But now what happens when an auditor goes to the farm and checks whether the farm is compliant to the standard? This is what happens. The auditor has claimed that the farm is not in natural wetlands, when it clearly is. It's in the intertidal region, it's in salt flats. It's got certified, and the audit report says the farm is not in natural wetlands. In this one, another farm from Vietnam, it says the farm is not near the coast. It's actually 25 meters from the high, it's 25 meters below the high tide line. This farm cannot be certified under that criterion, and it is. In this farm, the auditor says that the nearest pond is 2 kilometers from the coastline. It's not even 200 meters from the coastline, and 200 meters is national Indonesian law, requires that all ponds have to be at least 200 meters. It is within the intertidal zone. In fact, if you look at the entire audit report, about 200 pages, you'll realize that the farm doesn't have any sort of pumping mechanism. They just open sluice gates during high tide and flush everything out into the sea. So clearly it has to be part of the intertidal zone, and it's difficult to understand why the auditor would say that it is 2 kilometers away from the coastline. Now, I will start making hypotheses later on, but let's just continue with farms which should not have been certified, but nevertheless are. And incidentally, if the ASC stopped certifying farms like this, they'd lose 80% of their clients. 80% is a conservative estimate. Most farms which they certify are not certifiable under their own standard. This is one of the largest shrimp farms in the world. It's 119 square kilometers. And the same criterion it was built before 1999. So a different rule applies here. Under that rule, they are supposed to rehabilitate 50% of their area. So there needs to be a 50 square kilometer region somewhere which has been completely rehabilitated. This farm was certified in 2014. And when Khushiapa and other members of the network, I was also there, we raised this point in 2010 that where are you going to rehabilitate mangroves, and how are you going to do it? And they assured us then, because the standard hadn't been officially published, they said it would happen, and we were called theoreticians at that time. And it was theoretical because the farm hadn't yet been certified. It was certified in 2014. Same criterion here. Incidentally, if you look at the slide, the rehabilitation program is taken from one of the network partners. It's a direct ripoff from their website. Mangrove Action Project has worked with us, with Khushiapa and Nijirakuri and other members of the alliance. So criterion 2.2.2, and this is from the latest version of the ASC standard, says that if you've built your farm before May 1999, you're required to rehabilitate 50% or greater. So in 2014, we asked them, where's this rehabilitated area? It should be there. The audit report, on the other hand, says that there's no need for it. The auditor doesn't mention it at all. The farm was audited again in 2018, and this time the auditor says that reforestation plan is in place and it covers 50% of the total current farming area. It's not clear whether the auditor actually went to this spot, because all that the report says is, I have seen photographs of it. Those photographs are not part of the report, but she claims to have seen photographs of it. Now, this is 2018. 4 years have passed. The farm is not compliant. It remains certified, and it's not rehabilitated anything. 2020, another 2 years have passed. And this time the auditor just ignored the entire criterion and says no mangrove area converted. And where there's supposed to be a comment on the rehabilitation, there's no rehabilitation. This is one of the largest farms in the world. I mean, the output is in the order of thousands of tons, multiples of thousands of tons. So this is not a small farm. And this is one of the biggest sources of revenue for the ASC. So I suppose that's why this is the other problem that you see when you read about 200 or so audit reports, or maybe more, that none of the farms are actually compliant. They're all provisionally compliant, and yet they're allowed to sell their produce as fully certified. So the ASC makes a license fee. The farm continues to sell produce which is not certifiable, but they continue to use the label, and nobody gets penalized for it. And it's just continuing. The auditor said that the EIA report, the Environmental Impact Assessment report for a farm certified in 2014 was from 1998. And they were using a 16-year-old EIA. And it was flagged in 2014 saying, okay, we'll verify it in the next audit. That's the arrow on the right. If you look at the next audit, well, the most recent one in 2020, they're using the same 16-year-old report. They've just reprinted it, and now it's fine. So now it's a 26-year-old environmental impact assessment for a farm which required 2 impact assessment reports in 2014 when it was first certified. So what about the rehabilitation?
Amit, you'll have to start winding up soon. I don't want to cut it because it's important, but just be a bit, so just the most important points.
I'll go through the most important ones. Rehabilitation under the ASC, when the auditor says that we've done rehabilitation, shown in the bright green areas here for a farm in Honduras, is essentially the same area from 1980, which they haven't used in the farm, and they're just claiming that they've rehabilitated it now. For a farm which has contracts, which for worker training, which is their socially responsible pillar, the biggest contract farm in the world is not compliant, has not been compliant since the time it was certified. And the ASC, on the other hand, claims that their standards are ending poverty everywhere over the world. They're using antibiotics. The reporting is not right. They claim not to use certain kinds of antibiotics, but the evidence that they use it is in the audit reports, and the auditor says that the farm did not use antibiotics. So I'll just end by saying that a lot of the documentation generated for these audits is done by third parties. So the farm would hire a consultant who would come and then give an environmental impact assessment, and that would be accepted by the auditor. And so this, for instance, is a farm from Bangladesh. It has a 98-page environmental impact assessment report. They had this shows a photograph from the opening meeting. All the community members are apparently here. The team was there for 4 days. This was the closing meeting. And all the documentation looks fantastic until you realize that at 2 meetings, 4 days apart, all the participants are wearing the same clothes. So the takeaway from all this is essentially that the change that was promised by certification, that it would get their worst performers to improve over time. I think that trial phase is now over, because these farms are supposed to be their best performers. Forget the worst performers. Certification is a self-selecting process. So I don't think, as Gudrun said, this is not a product that yields to the tool of certification. It is not the right product to, it's not the right tool to use to regulate this industry. Thank you.
Thank you, Amit. That was, I'm sorry I had to cut you, but it was very important. I think last but not least, we really would like to hear Vandana, who actually introduced me that this is an issue that's not just for Bangladesh when I spoke to her, and introduced me to everybody that I'm speaking. Because of her, I've got contacts, friends, and people I can, we struggle together, we fight together on this issue. So Vandana, I don't think there's any environmental issue that you've not been involved in and have not been part of us, giving us the kind of inspiration and courage to continue. So Vandana, over to you.
Thank you very much, Kushi, for helping remember mainly the 90s and helping remember Karunamoyee in times of Corona, where Karuna means compassion. And I think what we have to evolve is a very strong politics of compassion to deal with not just the last 30 years of the rule of global corporations and global capital, with the shrimp being the first embodiment, in my view, neoliberal globalization, the first product that devastated democracy, people's rights, ecosystems, science. How did I end up? I'm sitting in the mountains. How did I end up looking at industrial shrimp farming? It must have been, I think, around 93, 94. A group of women in the coastal areas of Andhra Pradesh broke a shrimp farm because, as so many of the reports today have reported, when you bring salt water from the sea to the land will get salinated. And so their fresh water was going. They were having to walk 10 miles. And I worked out over my 50 years of activism that the 10-mile walk of women is the tipping point where they say no more. Whether it's Coca-Cola in Plachimada or the women of Chipko or the women of the coastal areas. And around that time, Jagannathans, who was an amazing Gandhian, leading the movement in Tamil Nadu. And it was because of him, Kushi, we were in 95 in the public hearing in Chennai, Madras still, and Mr. Idris of CAP was there and all of us were together. Around that time, he was building the movement and trying to bring the Supreme Court case. So I'd done the Nellore study. I developed, on the basis of very rapid assessment, the Supreme Court case that was filed, I think, in 94. And in 96, the judgment had come. Of course, we were also doing the parallel mobilization, the public hearings, and I was doing a lot of research. And I had hoped we'd have, because when you invited me, I remembered a film we had made of the struggles of that time, but my colleague is busy with his mother in hospital, and he's the one who knows how to upload on YouTube. And we will get it uploaded, and you'll all have this film called The Violence of the Blue Revolution. Now, I'd worked on the violence of the Green Revolution in the 80s, also funded by the World Bank. The bank had given India 423 million. And it was part of a package, of this neoliberal package, where they were saying, we shouldn't be growing food anymore. We should be industrially farming shrimp, industrial meat, and flowers and fruits and vegetables for export. Forget staple foods, forget livelihoods in agriculture. And sadly, what they prescribed is now getting more and more mature as the way of thinking. In that short, rapid assessment I did to build the Supreme Court case, I worked out that for every dollar traded, and everyone was only looking at the amount of money you would make, there was $10 equivalent of local economy destruction. Of course, local economies don't get counted. Yeah, that's part of the problem with the way growth is measured and GNP and GDP is measured. For every livelihood in the shrimp farms, 20 were destroyed in fisheries and farming. And then when we did the public hearing in '97, by then scientists around the world had joined, and we have a little report we did of that public hearing, yeah? Facts about the shrimp industry. That 1 acre of a shrimp farm creates a shadow acreage of destruction of 200 acres equivalent. So we are talking of a very, very large destructive ecological footprint in terms of, 11th December 96 is when the decision came of the Supreme Court. And immediately the industry organized and said this was going to displace 1 million farmers. Well, no, the small farmers were being displaced by the shrimp industry. And all our assessments were showing that in India, 20 million farmers and fishermen were losing their livelihoods. I remember particularly at the public hearing, an old person who had come and said they're destroying the mangroves. And the next time a storm comes from the sea, it will absolutely destroy our villages. Sure enough, when the 2004 tsunami hit, the villages that had resisted shrimp farming and had protected their mangroves and sand dunes were protected. The ones that had been bullied into shrimp industry through mafia tactics were the ones that were wiped out and washed away. I want to just quickly read the decision of December 11, 96 of the Supreme Court bench. And we were meantime also doing studies like this study of Chenmin Ketu. Rice and shrimp are not oppositional. The Chenmin Ketu or the Pokali system in Kerala, Chenmin means shrimp, very high quality shrimp. In the low rainfall season, when you have more brackishness, you have shrimp in the same backwaters. And then when the rains come, the shrimp droppings fertilize the Pokali rice, and then the straw of the Pokali feeds the shrimp. It's a totally renewable zero waste cycle. And what I have called the monoculture of the mind applies in the green revolution of agriculture and the blue revolution of shrimp farming, where for the World Bank, only the commodity that is traded is looked at, not the system. And our studies showed, and we've done detailed studies, that overall, a system of shrimp and rice is more productive in terms of biological production and in terms of food and nutrition. But for them, the Pokali rice doesn't count because shrimp is the new commodity, as Gudrun described. It's being so rapid. And I remember those days the World Bank was saying, why should it be a luxury commodity? It should be used cheap enough for everyone to have. So the Supreme Court decision said all industrial shrimp farms and intensive shrimp farms had to close. That all aquaculture farms had to be destroyed. The displaced workers had to be paid compensation. And I remember during that public hearing, the industrial shrimp farms walked up to me and said, we want to speak. I said, this is for the people. This is for the coastal people. And they said, we are going to reverse the Supreme Court judgment. And we have a list here, how just like in Bangladesh, in India, the local farms are political people, MLAs and MPs. And it's a combination, it's an example of what I call the corporate state that was created by neoliberalism, where corporations use politically powerful people and appoint the authoritarians. And this combination, and they walked up to me and said, we can buy every MP for 1 crore rupees. They then changed the Coastal Zone Act, which is the basis of our Supreme Court judgment, because you couldn't have polluting activity within the coast. So they just said shrimp farming would be excluded from this polluting activity. I know we are short of time. I want to just go quickly into areas where we need to be organizing afresh. Because at one level, you know, neoliberalism and globalization concentrated wealth even more. My latest book, Oneness versus the 1%, has a lot of detail about this new concentration of power. And even during the lockdown, the tech billionaires have walked away with 670, nearly $1 trillion additional, while people were losing their livelihoods. Now, you would not imagine that Silicon Valley and big tech is entering food. So Amit talked in detail about how certification isn't telling the truth. But we are moving into a stage where there will be seafood without the sea. There will be fish without fish. So let me give you an example of what just one salmon, I mean, they're trying to do genetic engineering, of course, but this finless food, they name them, so they also pick very nice ecological names of indigenous languages. It's called Blue Nalu, which in Hawaii means the ocean waves and mindfulness. And they basically are talking about cellular fish, taking a few cells from a live fish and then multiplying them in labs through proprietary, custom blend of liquid vitamins, amino acids, and sugars. The cells grow into broad sheets of fish tissue, not fish, tissue, that can be cut into fillet and sold fresh and frozen. And they'll get sustainable certification if we don't stop it by organizing. The fish has no head, no tails, no bones, no blood. It doesn't breathe, it doesn't swim. This is the end of taking care of the ocean, taking care of the coast, taking care of the fish. I think one of the things that's coming in the way, and this is where the South is particularly important, you know, we've had an evolution over such long periods of time, fisheries over thousands of years, farming over 40 centuries, according to King. We have co-evolved with nature. We haven't declared war with nature. I mean, those beautiful polders are not a war against the ocean, but working within the restrictions and limits to somehow carve out an ecological space. Because the West colonized on the basis of idea that we are separate from nature and we are masters. Of course, those who did the shrimp farming have that design in mind, but the fake fish people have that same design in mind. And sadly, a lot of our friends who think they're ecological maintain what I call the ecological apartheid, that humans are in one place and nature's in another, and nature can't be where humans are, which is the misconception. And that is why they're willing to accept artificial food as if it is the solution to the problems that were created. So you'll see a new language of nature-based solutions. You'll see the new language of the World Economic Forum, from where all these crazy ideas come, including neoliberal globalization of the Great Reset. The Rizwan talked about golden rice coming to Bangladesh as the Biti Bangan. What I see happening very rapidly, if we don't organize a fresh building on the movements that have already been built, not just today, but for long times. When the British extracted 45 trillion from us and left 60 million people without food, dying of famine. The last big famine was 42. We were one at that time, Kushi. We weren't divided. The British then were, of course, busy with their divisions. And of course, the Bengal partition was their first attempt to divide on the basis of religion. But you'll remember, along with Karunamoyee's martyrdom, and I want to remind you that in India, 2 fishermen were killed. Chandrakant Malik, whose widow Kali is in the film, and Gopal Nayak, whose widow Savitri is in the Blue Revolution film. And I want to remember particularly the Jagannathans and Banke Bihari Das, who were such important players in this issue. At that time of the Great Bengal famine, women started a Tebhaga movement called Jan Debo Dhan Debo Na. And I think we need to reactivate that movement, Kushi, because Dhan will be the place of colonization. If the golden rice has failed, we threw it out from India in 2000. They took it to Philippines. It's still failing. The yellowness of it and the beta carotene goes away. We have a little book called Green Solutions to versus Golden Rice. And, you know, just a little bit of amaranth leaves, a little bit of coriander leaves, a little bit of curry leaves, some drumstick leaves can give you all the vitamin you need. And all you need is 1 carrot. So what we need is more gardens rather than genetically engineered and fake food. What they're preparing for is, in the name of the poverty and malnutrition, create force feeding of this fake food. So already in India, there's talk about compulsory distribution of fortified rice, like fortified salt, which gave high BP to everyone because it was artificial, basically lab-made salt rather than sea salt or mountain salt. So I think what we need to do now, together, all of us and bigger movements joining in, is defense of nature and a reminder that we are part of nature. And we don't have nature-based solutions. We have nature-based civilizations who realize we are part of the earth and not outside and not enemies, not out of control. The second is that the only true food is that which is produced ecologically, and no amount of lying can correct the damage. That's why we must build more and more local economies. And I love those images of the return to Polder 29 and seeing vegetables, that of course it's absolutely possible because the earth is living, therefore regeneration is possible. She's not dead matter that once you've broken her up, you leave her aside. No, she lives and she regenerates. And another issue, big issue, will be biopiracy. Salt-tolerant issues were mentioned. Navdanya saved seeds. We've saved thousands of rice varieties, 4,000 rice varieties. And Bill Gates now is trying to patent the climate-resilient varieties, 1,500 patents, through digital genomic mapping, which is the new way to do biopiracy. For those of you who want to know more about this, read our report on the gates to the global empire, on Bill Gates and his empire, where he's taking control of seed, ag one, digital farming, farming without food, food without food in labs. They're expecting us to all be silenced with the fear of a virus. This is the time to be particularly conscious about our place on earth and our power as people. Because when we join hands, the fictions of capital, the brute force of capital, the mafia tactics of capital, which took the life of Karunamoyee, they tried, but it doesn't work beyond a point. So it is really a time for a new international movement of freedom for the earth and freedom for people from the falsehood and fakeness, whether it's certification or the food itself, or the methods of production or trade. It's not that fake fish will stop shrimp farming. They'll have all of the violent systems maintained. And I think this is the time to reclaim the indigenous, and to reclaim people-centered, nature-centered economies. Thank you.
Thank you, Vandana. I think that was brilliant in bringing us all that we talked. It's incredible how each one of us, when we spoke, and no one knew what the other one was going to be speaking, it sort of followed a pattern and a theme, and we all spoke in the same line, the same kind of thinking that we had. That was amazing. We really have gone a bit over time, but if there is, no, we still have a bit of time. If there is, do we have any questions for each other, or shall we take, if there are a couple of questions from people who are watching us, we can take that, and then we can, all of us, say something to each other if you wish to, and round up. So, Moyuk, are there any questions that you think are very important that you'd like us to address?
There were two questions which I flagged there in the chat box.
In my chat box, or in this
Zoom,
chat box?
In Zoom.
In Zoom, okay. So, yeah. One is Meena Raman, a good friend of many of us. Incredulous that shrimp aquaculture is being prompted as an adaptation solution. Such a false solution. Which development agencies are doing this? Does any one of you want to answer? I can answer. We all know who are doing this. Yeah, Vandana wants to answer that, and then I'll talk to another. There's another question. Shall I read both the questions and see if anyone who wants to respond to each of them or together? Shanila Kabir, I'm loving this discussion, especially because in classroom, she's a student of environment and climate change. In classroom discussions for my climate change adaptation course in Dhaka, shrimp cultivation has been used as an example of notable locally led adaptation methods to tackle salinity intrusion in the coastal regional. How is the soil able to revert to agricultural land? Does the saline water not degraded? So basically these two questions are out of the many questions that Moyuk helped me raise. So I know, Vandana, you wanted to respond, but is there anyone else?
Yeah, you know, hi Meena, so good to hear you, and hello Gudrun too. It's been a long time since we all met. You know, when we think of global capital today, we have to realize that the development agencies are actually minor players now. The billionaires are the rulers. And that's the subject of my book, Oneness versus 1%, because the money of these billionaires is then in the big asset management funds, which were nowhere in 2008 when Wall Street collapsed. But BlackRock, which is driving a lot of this bad investment, is doing it all in the name of sustainability. And Bill Gates does everything in the name of climate change. Artificial lab-made breast milk is a climate solution, according to Mr. Gates. In terms of the other question on salinity, you know, because nature is so adaptive and humans have been so ingenious, farmers have been breeding, and farmers have bred for coastal areas, salt-tolerant and flood-tolerant rices. That's why it's wrong to assume that with salinity, the only option is industrial shrimp farming. When the example of Chilka I gave, but everywhere the Gharis and Berries, the whole Chilka Lake used to be having shrimp farming, but all the rice in the coastal areas. So we need to look at the diversity, but worst, and every speaker showed, the mangroves are our protection, and shrimp farms are intolerant of mangroves. And if we don't have mangroves, we have no protection from climate change. As the women of Tamil Nadu told me when I went after the tsunami, and I was talking about you know, rejuvenation, and of course we took salt-tolerant seeds, 2 truckloads from the farmers of Orissa to the farmers of Tamil Nadu who had been told they couldn't farm anymore because there was too much salt. And we took 2 truckloads and they had a rice harvest right away. But the women said, we want to plant. They didn't say mangroves. In Tamil, they used a word. And when my interpreter translated, the word was so beautiful. The trees that caress the angry waves. These are the worldviews we need to reclaim.
Thanks. Anyone else wants to respond in any of these issues? Amit.
You can look up a lot of research on what's called community-based mangrove restoration, and in terms of the hydrology of coastal salinity, it's like Dr. Shiva said, it's just a matter of time and allowing natural regrowth and just helping it along. So it can be done. But look up CBCMR, and I think Mangrove Action Project has a lot of published documentation on this. ResearchGate will also give you a lot of publication. I'd like to add one more. This point about solutionism and looking to the lab for solutions is something that people like me have been coming from our backgrounds. We gravitate towards this, but it's changing now. And it's only when you take a step back and look at it in a holistic way that you realize how absurd some of these solutions are. For instance, there was a solution for global warming to fit catalytic converters to cows because they generate methane. I mean, this is an absurd solution, but it was seriously discussed. So I think we need to be wary of purely technical interventions for solutions that require a holistic intervention.
Yeah. Does anyone else want to say anything?
I'll just briefly say that sort of in response to the I think it was the first question about who is promoting this in coastal Bangladesh. Most of the major aid agencies have been supporting this idea of shrimp as an adaptation strategy. And also these sort of major adaptation funds have been supporting it. So the World Bank, the FAO, USAID, all have projects sort of shrimp as an adaptation strategy. And I think that to this point about the potential for regeneration, the challenge isn't necessarily whether it is possible, but it is how will communities who have decided that they'd like to return to farming rice, how do they sustain themselves in the meantime? Because once the land is degraded, it is quite difficult to sort of regain that fertility. And so in Polder 29, it took them about 7 years, depending on the part of the polder and how salinated the land was. And in that time, you know, that it was a real economic struggle for the people who weren't able to farm at the level of production that they had been to sort of sustain a livelihood. And one of the things that I think is most important to realize about their ability to do that was that they were supported both by the organizers from Niger Akori and also from Bela, Rizwana Appa's organization, because the sort of urban industrialists who had come to grab the land used these tactics of constant judicial harassment. So bringing cases repeatedly against the landless activists who were really struggling to regain control of their land. And the only reason really that they were able to sustain the work against shrimp during that period was because they had this legal support from Bela. And so I think, you know, we need to recognize that it's possible to do this, that there are local organizers and community members who want to do it, but also there's really, really critical work going on by organizers and legal advocacy groups within, within Bangladesh. I'm sure also this is taking place within India, that makes it possible to do this kind of work in the face of these incredible narratives about what must happen in the face of climate change.
Thank you. I think we could go on if we wish to, but then we'd never end because this is a discussion that we're all so passionate about. But maybe taking what Vandana had mentioned is it's time for us to come together again, because the future is so frightening. And I think we have to really band together, come together, and with the communities we're working with at the local level, really fight back. We have to have this interaction. I'm glad that we had this when we had this chance to meet again after so long, even if it's virtually. Let us continue and increase and have a more discussion. This is something I think we could do. And one of my colleagues has asked Vandana, when talking about the global movement, you have mentioned is that on the level of idea of us as a group, we have started working on this. So as someone from Europe, Germany, graduated in environmental protection, this is somebody who has written. I would appreciate more information on this in the future, and of course to be part of it. And I know many people who would like to be part of it. I think the person who wrote it is called Violeta Jankovic. Maybe Vandana, is it possible that we start a little group amongst ourselves virtually, where people can ask questions?
Sure.
Yeah,
sure. And I would just like to remind everyone that the Corona lockdown has, in a way, in a tragic way, equalized the world in destitution. Sadly. I don't know how many, 200 million people even in the US, people are standing for food in queues. So the idea of food sovereignty, the idea of where will our food come from, is so urgent everywhere. And on the one hand, the fake solution makers will bring their fake solutions. And that's why we need broad alliances. Gudrun is here. I think it is time for ecological movements and the food movement and the women's movement and the movement for health and the movement for corporate accountability and accountability of billionaires to all start focusing on how food is produced, and food produced with a light footprint is better for livelihoods, better for ecosystems, better for our health. And this heavy footprint, even if it's made invisible through fake certification, like Amit pointed out, it's still destructive. And this is the time to do all the work, this lovely combination of activism and research. It never works with only one side of it. When we have both combining, that's when we are strong. And then when we have good law added to it, then we are even stronger. And this is the time to bring every strength of the people, independent research, public interest law, and activism everywhere, not distant activism, but everywhere, because we are now not only connected through the pandemic, we are connected through hunger. We are connected through unemployment. We are connected through new poverty. And how we get out of this must be our decision and not that of the billionaires who want to squeeze life out of everything.
Yeah, thank you. And Nina, it's great to see you, not see you, at least know that you're here virtually. And we'd all love to meet up one day when the world's where we can travel again, restart our activism. We've all been doing activism, but we've not done it collectively. So we do it collectively. But I just wanted to let you know, a lot of the NGOs, unfortunately, and the NGOs funding has been so, they have been so curtailed that they have been forced to do what is working with the corporate sector for social responsibility. And I have been to Oxfam Novib and written letters to the Oxfam Board International. They are totally uninterested because the shrimp industry is funding their officers, staff, and their officers. So they're all buying into it. So apart from what Kasha said, that the projects and all the donors are doing it, even the NGOs are part of it. The Aquaculture Stewardship Council has organizations like IUCN Netherlands, has Novib, has WWF. So, you know, if these big names are there, people would start thinking that these are organizations that you respect. And so, you know, I think they're trying to buy as many people off. As Vandana said, you know, they think that how many billions do I need to spend to buy off and let our industry just go unhindered. I think those of us who have the strength within us and the ethics within us will have to band together. We have to come together. So I want to thank all of you for coming, and all of those who were listening to us. And this will be on our web pages. I think Navdanya was very nice to also had to be co-host, as was 1 Billion Rising, because they have a huge outreach. Sangat, I'm sure, will be putting it up on their pages. Nijra Kuri has put it up on their page, and the Asia network that we have, which is sort of not as active as we would like it to be, has it on the page. But everybody, all of you, if you just link it up to your pages so that people can come back to it when they have time and listen to us, we could all form this interlinking amongst ourselves. And Gudrun was saying that she could talk to the SSNC and see if they could be part of the whole process too. And they have always been part of the process. We have, I mean, there are lots of people. We wanted Jim Wickens and Alfredo Cuoto, who've been with us right from the beginning, and Jorge Varela from the Honduras, and we wanted Riza Damanik. I hope all of them are watching. I mean, I know the ones in the Americas can't watch, but they'll watch later. But the others were watching. And I want to thank everybody and all of you for saying yes. The moment I wrote to you, all of you, we'll win. This earth has to survive. The people in this earth have to survive, or this planet have to survive. We all have to survive. So thank you so much, every one of you, and all of you. Shapun, Kasha, Amit, Rizwana. Why do I forget Rizwana? She's always next to me. So, you know, it's like she's my sister. She's always there with me. Gudrun, and my, you know, colleagues who have been so good, Moyuk and Rizanu Rahman, Rose, and Shishmita Preetha, all of them who've helped me put this all together. So thank you all so much. And Moyuk especially, who's been there behind the scenes. So we'll be meeting again. So this is the start. And what better way to remember and commemorate the fight that Karunamoyee gave her life for and started, and we continued. If Karunamoyee could know that the struggle has led to people, more and more people resisting, and we hope it will go even further. So thank you, everybody. I know in the area where Karuna is, they have a very small gathering. Usually they have 3,000-4,000. This time there'll only be 100 or 2 who are from that village itself. But nonetheless, they don't want to give up, because I said during this Corona time, you still want to get together. And they said, we can't not let her anniversary go without us being together. So the world, we are all there together, and we'll fight together, and we have to. This earth, this planet has to survive. There's no other way. Thank you, everybody.